The Earth spent a lot of time developing a buffet of potentially useful biological structures. For the most part, that buffet was designed for Earth-like conditions, which are very different from space. But Earth isn't all cozy. It's got some seriously extreme places and lots of just plain weird ones. And life squeezed into pretty much all of them and figured out ways to be life. So if we wanted to set out to design a being to exist in space, a more perfect astronaut, Earth might be a good place to look for features we'd like to emulate. It's also the home of every being we've ever known, so it's really the only references we have for beings. So let's design a better astronaut from the resources available on Earth. Our astronaut should be intellectually as capable as us, but physically enriched and optimized to exist in space using features available from Earth's biosphere. And by existing in space, I'm not thinking naked void exactly, but also not brain in a jar level encapsulation. I'm aiming for some balance between a body that's robust to life in space, but also optimized to create and manipulate the technology needed to live and do interesting work there. It's hard not to use humans as a template because we really are objectively well suited as engineers with our thumbs and bipedalism and all that, but we're best suited for engineering on Earth, and I'm trying to adapt that same idea to space. So there are two fun cop-out answers I'd like to get out of the way first. First, just tardigrades, aka water bears. They're already pretty well adapted to space, and I'm cynical enough about human intelligence to say they're within an order of magnitude or so of humans on a scale of what's probably out there. Kind of a joke, but tardigrade DNA definitely has some impressive features. But I'm going to do more of an organ limb level assembly of this astronaut, not cellular, except when it's convenient or funny, I guess. The other cop out answer is just engineer a creature sort of like the encyclopod in Futurama that just already has all the DNA of Earth encoded and can swap out features as needed. That would kind of be the literal zenith of biological evolution. A creature that could consciously command its own genetic change on a biological level and maintain a seamless experience of consciousness. I guess a lab full of geneticists that experiment on themselves is effectively the same thing, but I like the idea of a more elegant sort of shapeshifter being that can do it all with style. That kind of is kind of nonsense, but what is it? But it's also just not what I'm doing right now. This is about an astronaut we might plausibly build from Earth's biology. If it was plausible to just slap together features into an astronaut, it's not plausible, but it's more plausible than the encyclopod thing. So that's just what I'm doing. Okay, so maybe start with a base platform animal. Obviously, the nervous system and brain is crucial, so crucial for this thing doing astronaut things. So we kind of have to stick to high order mammals. Most of those are heavily adapted for legs and walking, which isn't super relevant in space. So I'm leaning towards starting with a smallish dolphin body and give it some thick ape skin or something so it doesn't dry out because we're not hauling all that mass around for habitats, all that water mass around. A dolphin body could be modified to support something like a human brain and have a lot of the infrastructure in place already. So, but no unnecessary limbs. So you can just start adding what you need, like Mr. Potato Head. Also, their oxygen demands seem a lot more flexible already. It is tempting to look to photosynthesis or some entirely different energy generation mechanism, but it's a lot longer road to how that could ever feed the demands of a mammalian brain. And I want to start somewhere more fun, and a basic mammal platform does a lot of the work for me. And as impressive as human omnivorousness is, it's not all that useful when you produce all your nutrition in a closed loop anyway. So it's probably easier to start with something with a simpler digestive system, which it seems like dolphin have with all the fish eating, but I don't really know. I'm guessing they could run on a homogeneous protein slurry that would be easier to synthesize than a balanced human diet. Then again, they might need some complex fish vitamins or whatever that I'm not accounting for. And though echolocation would be of limited use in space, it seems like the neural processing structures could be useful for some other sense organs, so may as well keep those in place. So So that's our platform. Imagine a stumpy dolphin torso with ape skin, no fins, just a tapered tube with input and output holes. Has an identifiable front, back, top, bottom, but other than that, it's just a digestive system with a brain. So obviously, we have to start by adding what we need from humans to make this thing an astronaut. It seems like there's a lot of territory to cover given how many advantages we have on Earth, but I'm actually thinking it's just the brain. Everything else we do can be done with other animal parts, maybe a lot better. So that's all the humanity we're going to need from Homo sapiens. Just a gross, wrinkly, mushy brain, maybe even just the outer layers. Our hands were pretty useful though, so we got to figure out something with extremely fine dexterity but still pretty strong for their size. I want to say tentacles. Those are pretty demanding to control, and I'm not sure a more underarticulated, rigid structure couldn't do a better job. But tentacles do have great sensory use, so it's hard to ignore them. Do we need bones? Okay, so I could spend all day on the possibilities for manipulators to replace the human hand. And honestly, there are just so many possibilities. There might not be a truly optimum configuration, so I'm just going to put one together that I like and leave it at that. It's going to be two muscular trunks, similar to but smaller than an elephant's, each terminating in a three-fingered hand consisting of tentacled fingers and one claw extending from the wrist on one of the arms. The claw is modeled on the function of a mantis shrimp's powerful smasher claw. Not really a defensive feature, but it can produce extreme force on a very small area. So it just seems like it could be useful for a lot of situations in space. Also dangerous as hell, but hey, you're in space. The trunk does have a bone structure of interconnected ball socket joints that are capable of mostly moving freely, but in a straight configuration, they can be locked with a twisting mechanism at each joint when more leverage is needed. That last part isn't in nature, to my knowledge, but I figure we can modify bone, mechanical function somewhat. So I'm tempted to pack a bunch of cool extra sensors on those manipulator limbs, but I think that brings the danger of damaging them, so I'm inclined to leave the manipulators as touch only and just like human hands. We obviously don't need feet or legs, but we do have to get around somehow. So we'll need to either grab or push off stuff, or be able to move enough air around to propel ourselves. We already have manipulators, but I think we need to keep those free to work. So we should probably have another push-grab anchor kind of limb. But it seems like a one-legged bird can do most of that, so let's just use that. Third limb, two seems unnecessary. Birds also have wings we could use to propel ourselves, but that's massive overkill in zero gravity. I would like some thrust, though. All right, let's give it a kangaroo pouch. It can pull inside out and hold tight with manipulator limbs to generate directional thrust. Also, having a pouch just seems handy, so we'll do a couple of those on side pockets, and the hands can pull each one of them out and use them like kind of webbed gloves sewn into their hips for flapping. Yeah, that could be useful. Okay, so now we have a dolphin stump with ape skin, two crazy trunks with tentacle claw hands, one bird leg, and hideous skin sacs that can pull out to move air or leave in to store stuff. That's a pretty good start, I think. So the front of the dolphin is just a food intake orifice. But of course we need sensors. If you've listened to many of these essays, you might know what's coming next. Articulated eye stalks. I did a thing on how awesome those are and why, so I won't go into it here, but that's going to be the primary vision and probably audio sensory apparatus. Maybe not audio. Maybe we'll leave that for somewhere else. Definitely primary vision. I don't want to stop at the 5 human senses in general, though. It seems like that's where we can really maximize the potential that evolution gave us. I already brought up mantis shrimp with the claw, but they have a lot of great features to borrow. We're going to pretty much steal their entire optical system. All the advantage of the stalks, plus their hyperspectral range, the polarization filtering, Anything else they have that we haven't figured out or I just don't know about, we're just going to copy paste their entire I folder from the DNA, plus all the drivers and apps. And I want to push that hyperspectral range even further. So we're going to throw in some pit viper DNA to be able to sense thermal radiation. It might be hard to integrate those on the stalks, though. So we're going to have one big heat sensing region between where the eyes were before we put them on stalks. Ears are a tough call. I just the whole audio thing. I want maximum range of pressure and vibration sensing, but I also want a robust structure that won't pop easily in changing pressures. There's a lot to choose from, but I figure there's got to be a way to combine the best of a bat and a whale to allow sensing from extremely low to extremely high frequencies. Whatever that sensory organ is, let's put it in a fatty cone with a sphincter so it can close up entirely to protect it when pressures get too high or low. Yeah, I'm kind of phoning in the ears. I don't know that we even need them, but I can't reason out why we don't exactly, so I'm just kind of winging it. I think we only need one ear, though. Localizing sound isn't critical in space habitat, seems like, so that just goes next to the heat sensor. Chemical senses always seem useful, but that's from our experience with humans in space. With technology we're just figuring out, made of materials we barely understand that interact with our bodies in ways we can't predict. I'm thinking once we've mastered technology to the point that we're building astronaut bodies and closed-loop environments for them to live in, maybe they won't have as much of a need to smell when things might be burning. I might be creating a huge problem for future space travelers, but I'm just going to say let's forego biological chemical sensors altogether. If they can't build technology they need to survive that doesn't include its own failure sensors, they're not going to last long. Foregoing chemical sensors does simplify things, but it also seems a tragic waste given the rich variety of available biological chemical sensing mechanisms. But a lot of that is really only advantageous in complex, dynamic, and unpredictable chemical environments, which a space habitat should be anything but. So, no more noses. Kind of sucks, but some obvious conveniences to the absence of smell in a closed environment. Okay, so now our astro freak can make energy from food and oxygen, move about in zero gravity, manipulate objects, and sense a fairly useful range of radiation and vibration. What else can we use? We could probably use some kind of advanced rotational orientation mechanism, but I think most of those are designed for gravity, so I'm thinking they might just have to be adapted from the vision system. Vision is going to be pretty important though, so I'm tempted to beef that up in general. Apparently squid skin has some light detection ability. So without knowing anything about that, I'm going to still propose that it could be adapted for orientation and movement tracking independent of a primary vision system. If the skin itself can be a wide field, low resolution, monochrome camera, it could be used as a reference to track its motion fairly efficiently. As long as the light field it's in is fairly consistent or cyclical changes can be predicted, once the being has a good light field map, it might be able to correlate its orientation in that field pretty effectively. That's all the sensing bonuses I can think of right now. There's probably more. But as much as variety as there is on Earth, its sensory focus is kind of limited. I'd love to include radio reception, but I can't find a Radio Shack in nature. Oh, and actually, we should toss in magnetic sense if we can. Apparently, even humans have proteins that respond to magnetic fields, but no nervous infrastructure to detect those changes. So I'm not sure on the specifics, but some way to detect magnetic fields would probably have some use. So from there, it just becomes sort of miscellaneous tools. I could think of interesting things we could do with a spider's silk gland, or something with a bombardier beetle's defenses for a biological thruster. But none of that's anything we couldn't make into a separate technology. Of course, the extreme end of all this gets us back to the brain in a jar solution, but I'm still using human success as engineers on Earth as a template. Though there is one step towards the brain in the jar scenario that makes sense, even if you really don't want to go there. we might as well accept that in a lot of ways, the astronaut's modified body is just a biological brain in a jar. So let's add a screw-on lid so we don't have to crack the jar to adjust the fluid levels. Let's add some kind of bio-interface port that allows sampling or transfer of some critical biological fluids or whatever. Maybe one for blood, one for spinal fluid, a digestive thing. I don't know. That's got a whole other conversation. Maybe just a thin, thick membrane or something, but something like that. Yeah. Okay, so let's see what we got. We got a stumpy dolphin body with ape skin that is also light sensing somehow, two trunk claw tentacle appendages, one bird leg, invertible pockets that double as hand webbings for flapping propulsion, a central thermal and pressure vibration sensing area on its head, articulated eye stalks with the capability of a mantis shrimp's vision system, and no nose, and maybe some kind of magnetic sensing ability, and a bioport. I intentionally left out reproduction because, come on, these things are clearly already dead sexy and don't need any help in that department. Not really. Actually, I'm thinking once you're intentionally and successfully swapping out entire body parts with DNA to maximize function, it doesn't really make sense to start shuffling code up with biological reproduction again. Self-cloning might have a place, but I figured just use the machine that made you. So I forgot about speech, but I'm also just not sure we need that. Of course, language is necessary, but spoken words... Audio does have a great broadcast feature, but how much do you need to broadcast inside of a space habitat? It just seems like visual communication is far more effective. You could still take advantage of sound's broadcastability just by banging on something or farting to get people's attention to convey simple ideas. But when you have their attention and you need to get specific, use a visual language. Between those trunk hands with the articulated eye stalks, sign language could be every bit as rich with as wide a bandwidth as vocal communication, if not far more. And there's already, there's writing and drawing pictures and symbols. Actually, I've thought a lot about communicating in space, and really what you want is redundancy. I think future astronauts should be able to communicate effectively by sign, touch sign, the hand hold touching thing, semaphore language, Morse code, and probably lots of other stuff I haven't thought of. But the idea is to just allow communication through every conceivable medium or complication that astronauts might need to communicate through. But that's another conversation. This is about bioengineering astronauts. Or rather, it was about bioengineering astronauts. I think I'm about done. I might come back later and play with the spider silk gland idea and stuff like that. But as far as designing a biological astronaut using Earth's biology that is functionally as well advantaged for space as humans are for Earth, but without starting from the cellular level, this is what I got. I personally think our freakish dolphin monster is quite adorable in its own way, but I'm clearly a little biased.